Okay, welcome all. I would like you to remind members that under the Council's procedures, this meeting will be recorded for upload to the Council website as soon as possible after the meeting. Can I ask that all mics are turned off until I have invited you to speak? Should you wish to speak, for those on screen, please raise your hands. Otherwise, indicate your request in the chat or question function on your screen. However, if you are on a telephone, please indicate verbally when appropriate your wish to speak. With regard to voting on recommendations, if there's no dissent to a recommendation, I will accept the silence as agreement in my capacity as chair. Should a vote, however, be required, it is my intention that all members be asked individually for their vote or a show by hands if all are visible. If during the meeting you have technical difficulties, please let the Democratic Services know as soon as possible. And my understanding that is tonight will be Karen Bowen. I all understand. Could you just confirm to me, members, that you have Karen's mobile number with you? Or your office number? Lots of thumbs up there. Councillor Johnson, is that the case for yourself as well? Thank you. Councillor Carroll? Councillor Drake as well?
I don't have Karen's mobile number, but is it on her email? Then I'll get it. That's fine.
Okay, on the email, it goes to her mobile, so it should be fine. Okay. All right, then, we're now going to go to the agenda itself. The first item on the agenda is appointment for vice chair. So I'm looking for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Pam Drake.
Okay, I'd like to second that. Any other nominations? No. Okay. Okay. Bearing in mind there's no other nominations, can I formally accept that Pam Drake is now vice chair? Okay. Thank you, Pam, and congratulations or commiserations, depending upon your point of view. All right then. Thank you. We're now moving on. Apologies for absence. We don't have any. Okay. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 15th July. Are you happy for me to sign it? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, any declarations of interest? No. Yes, Councillor Cox, you raise your hand. Councillor Cox, do you want to unmute yourself? Councillor Cox, I can't hear you.
Under capital monitoring, primary provision is covered, covers primary provision, and I'm an LEA governor on a bottom-line school, and this also covers comprehensive school, where I'm also a governor. Of course, I have the normal dispensation to speak and vote on matters.
Okay, well, if we're doing this, I'm also going to declare an interest then under capital monitoring, in the sense that I am vice chair of Victoria Governors. I do have dispensation to speak, but I am in my capacity as a LEA governor there as well. And I know that's also on there. Anyone else got anything to declare? No, doesn't look as though anyone else has. Okay, then we're now moving on to the presentation. All right, I understand it's called Working Towards Recovery. Okay, Rob, are you doing the presentation of this?
I think what you're going to get, Chair, is a bit of a double act, but I'm happy to start.
Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, by all means, fire away when you're ready.
Okay, so what we want to do this evening is just share with you and give you an update on the Council's response to the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and the work that we've been doing throughout the summer and into the early autumn on our recovery strategy. Bear in mind, though, that next month scrutinies will have the benefit of a further presentation on the recovery strategy itself, which is going through the cabinet process at the moment. So bear that in mind. And the second thing I would say is members on this committee would have seen something similar back in July as well, when we took a similar presentation to corporate performance and resources back in July. Every scrutiny committee is having the benefit of this presentation in this current round, so it wouldn't have been right to miss your committee out on that, despite the fact that you had something similar back in July. So hopefully that's clear at the outset. I don't know if we can move to the next screen. Great, thank you. So what you've got here is an illustration of how we've dealt with the coronavirus pandemic. So it's quite neatly split into 3 sections, although the boundaries between those sections aren't particularly clear because we drift in and out of different elements and different phases. So over the summer, we were very much in response phase. As transmission rates were increasing and as the communities across the Vale were impacted by COVID-19, we were very much in our response mode. Late summer, August, we started thinking about how we could transition out of lockdown. Governments across the UK called it easing out of lockdown. That brought with it challenges for us in terms of how we were going to ramp back up some of the services that we'd stood down. And that took place, and that's been pretty successful. The longer term aim or strategy is to look at those key themes that we'll touch on tonight, but you will then have a further presentation of in the next scrutiny round. The arrows, the blue arrows, are particularly relevant at the moment because increasingly over August we were dealing with the things in the amber box. Increasingly now, in the last few days especially, we're beginning to see a return back into that red box as we need to respond again, and we're keeping a really close eye with health board colleagues on the COVID-19 data that we get on a daily basis in terms of assessing what we need to do next as an organisation in partnership with our colleagues in health and across other public services in the Vale and also in Cardiff. So if we can go to the next slide. So our response has focused on those key areas on that slide, and very much related to taking those immediate steps that we had to take to manage the crisis. It was based first and foremost around keeping people safe and well, very much acting in line with government advice, regulations and guidance, and really looking to maintain certain services which were seen as being essential, and redirecting our priorities and our resource in terms of our time to those services that were seen as essential, away from those other services that we, in effect, we didn't stand down, but we put a lot less of a priority towards. And if we can move to the next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of an overview as to how we got through the summer. We had an emergency power process in place. Last cabinet before lockdown was held on the 23rd of March. That approved changes to decision-making framework across the organisation to allow quick decisions to be taken. Those decisions were all published online. We've had regular liaison and communication with colleagues both within the organisation, staff and members, but also outside the organisation as well. This committee met virtually for the first time in July. and this is now going to be the norm for all committees. And I think looking at the figures, it's going to be the norm for quite some time yet. We had a gold command structure in place, which we put in place in March. That structure met daily initially, 7 days a week for quite a considerable time. And that structure was pretty effective in terms of dealing with issues which were cropping up daily, keeping on top of national government advice and guidance and implementing that locally. So in terms of the next slide, very quickly, what have we learned from our response phase? What has continued? When we initially embarked on this journey back in March, what we were minded to do was step down certain services and redirect our efforts into those other priority services, which we did. But what I would say at this juncture is most of our services did continue in some form or other. What you'll find is that some of those services which we didn't flag up as being absolutely essential in light of a pandemic, in light of a crisis, even though we put that on record, those services did carry on. Some of the obvious exceptions, we closed our reception areas, for example, and that was purely driven by the need to protect health and safety of staff and residents in the community. So in reality, very little stopped, but reception services was one example which we did stop. There was some initial delays to the capital programme. That wasn't by design, but it was for two reasons. Contractors were going through the same process as us in terms of having to respond to the virus, and that impacted on their programmes, but also it was very difficult to let contracts, and in fact I'd go as far as to say it would have been quite inappropriate and risky to let programs let contracts during the pandemic. So what has been different during the summer? The really obvious differences from the organisation's perspective is we mobilised most of our staff from work from home to work from home when they could. And that message has been consistently given by Welsh Government throughout this time, and it continues to be that consistent message. The message is, if you can work from home, you should, so that way you avoid unnecessary travel. And the other things that we've done differently is obviously we've moved to a virtual way of working. Meetings are now held by this format. Face-to-face meetings have all but ceased, and that has brought challenges initially, but it has meant that we've had to invest in IT, and digital investment has been required as we've moved forward. So home working has worked, but needs more work. Obviously, we had to put a lot of time and effort into allowing staff to work flexibly, allow them to be set up at home, give them the necessary infrastructure and equipment. Face-to-face contact is being missed in some cases by both staff and customers. And I think what you will see moving forward is probably a bit of a hybrid or a blended approach, where face-to-face contact will be reintroduced, but along the lines that we will become a much more flexible, more agile organisation. The other thing that we've learned is you can't roll out all that ICT and that capability for virtual working without the necessary training and development. And obviously the need to join up decisions across the organisation to understand the impact of certain decisions on other departments and also on other organisations in our area. Morale and well-being is an interesting one, and this is a point which we'll come on to and touch very briefly next. We conducted a health and wellbeing survey of staff, and the general feedback from that we will come on to next. The general feedback has been positive. The numbers replying was very positive, which you could argue is surprising given that most people were working virtually. The demands and issues that are emerging that are relevant to this committee, demands of new governance arrangements, for example, virtual meetings, and how can we continue to develop them. Social distancing arrangements in workplaces is a big issue. PPE for staff when they're working in an office environment or in a closed setting with other staff or customers. The availability of materials and equipment due to supply chains was an issue over the summer, in the same way as I described earlier, issuing contracts. Flexible working has been a key issue for us, as I've already mentioned, and the initial reduction in demand for services which we saw over the summer, as most people appreciated and realized we were dealing with coronavirus on a full-time basis. What we've seen since the middle of August is the two worlds colliding, if you like. On the one hand, dealing with coronavirus and COVID-19, that hasn't gone away, and that still takes up a considerable amount of time. But then some of the normal business is ramping back in, and we want it to come back in, and that brings about challenges all of itself. So that takes us to the end of probably the first section in the presentation, Chair. So I don't know if you want to pause there and take any questions at this juncture.
Yes, I will. I'm going to ask members, have members got any questions in relation to what was just spoken about in terms of presentation? Anyone? Yeah, Councillor Cox. Councillor Cox and Councillor Drake have indicated. And Councillor Carroll, I believe. Should we start with Councillor Cox, please? Councillor Cox, yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's very, very good to see the survey showing that the staff morale is still high after working from home for so long. But now we're continuing to work from home. The days are getting shorter. Are there extra steps which we need to take in order to keep their morale up? Because obviously it's going to be severely tested during the winter period.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. That's a really good question, and it was one that was raised. I held a staff engagement session yesterday with about 30 staff from across the organisation, again virtually. And one of the issues that was raised was the need to continue to take a pulse check, if you like, by following this survey up with another survey as we go into the autumn. Because working from home initially from March through the summer is one thing, but doing it on an almost semi-permanent basis is a very different experience. So that is one area where we're going to focus on, and focusing on the health and well-being of staff in a virtual way rather than in a face-to-face way is very challenging. So those are two areas that we're going to address into the autumn. We will do another survey. We will find out how staff are coping and how they are feeling. And we're holding a development program with all our middle managers at the beginning of October. And the theme of that workshop program is basically how do we manage in a sort of virtual world, and how do we take care and oversight of the health and well-being of our staff in a working environment that's very, very different to what we knew before. So those are all things that are on the radar, and the survey will be redone in the autumn and will probably be redone as we approach the new year as well.
Thank you for that
Second,
answer.
Rob.
Thank you. Can I have Councillor Johnson? Did you indicate? No, you didn't. Okay then. Then Councillor Cowell then.
Chair, I mean, I was just looking to clarify that the staff survey that's referred to in here, which I think Tom's going to come on to in a minute, is that the same survey that was reported to us back in the summer rather than new information? So obviously that means that the data included is from fairly early on in the within the period rather than more recent.
Yes, it was. It's the same data that was reported back in July, Councillor Johnson. So a second one is imminent, and as a second does check really.
Okay, Councillor Drake next.
Harold wanted to speak before me.
Okay, Councillor Cowell then.
I think Councillor Drake put her hand up first, but I'm happy to go.
We'll go alphabetically, C before D.
Okay, well,
Okay.
I thank Councillor Drake for that. That's very kind. Quick question, really, in relation to mental health. And I appreciate you've said that Rob, that it's something that's being looked at moving forward. But I would be grateful for sort of some feedback on the work that's been done to date on the mental health impacts of working from home. But I don't put this authority in one particular camp. I think, to be honest with you, across the board, there hasn't been enough talk about the impacts that this pandemic is likely to have on people's mental health. I think that we hear a lot about the benefits of working from home, and I think there are benefits, but I do also think that some people, particularly those who live alone perhaps, the lack of social interaction as in person to person does present major difficulties. So one, I would be grateful, Rob, for some details. Obviously, I don't expect you to reveal any information that could identify anyone, but the numbers of concerns that have been raised from staff in relation to mental health impacts of these new arrangements. And secondly, any measures that have been put in place to date to help to provide the necessary support to overcome what has been a very difficult period for many, many people.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Drake now.
Yes, I just wanted to raise one thing. Another issue that is probably going to be looming on the horizon is the flu. Now, I don't know what strain is going to come in, and will we be prepared for that? Because it could be quite severe.
Both those in turn. If I deal with the flu one first, there's the winter flu vaccination programme will be rolled out as normal by the council. So that is something that is being planned regardless of COVID-19. On the issue of mental health, there's a couple of slides coming up in the deck in the next 4 to 5 slides dealing with the responses that we had. The responses we had, and I appreciate that these are back in July, were very favourable in terms of how people were feeling. Now, you've had a couple of months since then, so that obviously can change. But our occupational health team have continued to function throughout this time. And what was particularly pleasing from the survey is the very positive outcome in terms of the question of how staff felt about their immediate managers and the contact they were getting with their immediate managers. So that was really positive, despite moving people away from the workplace and into homes and working flexibly. So that gives me a lot of comfort that people know where to go for their health and well-being and for advice and support. But not only that people can also people who are also feeling relatively positive about their health and well-being and in terms of their anxiety levels. Now, what will be really interesting is what will happen when we rerun the survey to see if that has remained static or has actually dipped a little bit. But the staff's health and well-being is something that's really wedded to the way that our HR team have been functioning over this time in terms of providing support and advice, and also linking people in with occupational health where necessary as well.
Thank you for that. Does any other member want to say anything? Okay, should we then move on to the next bit of the presentation? Tom, are you doing this next bit?
Yeah, Tom can join in. More than happy for Tom to do the next section.
Fine, excellent.
I'm doing the next section then, Councillor Wilson.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the results of the survey. As Councillor Johnson's query earlier raised, these are the results that this committee saw back in the summer before the recess. So I'll just give you a very quick whistle-stop tour through them. We looked at the aspects that you can see on the screen in terms of health and wellbeing that Councillor Carroll was just referring to. We asked questions around senior leadership and line manager support, as well as some identification of issues around communication and working conditions as well. And this is the work that Rob was just talking about, feeding into our plans now as we go into the autumn and into the winter. So we had just over 1,100 responses, so that's about 44% of the current workforce. There's a caveat on this data that 70% of the people who responded were working from home, so that puts a certain complexion on things. But what's quite interesting is when you look at the pie chart on this slide, the majority of people clearly don't want to go back to 5 days or full time in the office. They're supportive of the principle of either working from home on a majority basis or certainly a more kind of blended approach. And that's something that's starting to feed into our plans about how could we possibly support that kind of approach. We asked questions around how worried people were, and you can see, as we described earlier on in the summer, that we kind of benchmarked or compared this with the Office for National Statistics survey that was done of employees at around the same time. And what I think you can see is that in the majority of instances, people that have got some worries, but not significant worries, and people who work for the council in response to this survey were somewhat less worried than the national average. And again, we looked when we asked about people to rate their mental health at the current time. And this is something that, again, we would do, as Rob suggested, in a further pulse check survey, that almost half of people felt that their mental health was good or excellent at that particular time. We asked around issues of health and well-being. It's been really important that we've been pushing out messages through StaffNet Plus and through briefings from team managers around how people can access support in a way when a lot of people are working remotely and working in a very different type of environment. And it's pleasing to see that seems to have gained traction, so that the vast majority of people understand where they can go to get information. They understand the steps that we're taking to protect mental health and well-being, and 70% of people feeling that the council cares about their health and well-being during the current time. We asked questions then around senior leadership, around elements of trust and whether people felt that as senior leaders we've been sufficiently visible during the pandemic. And these are slightly lower scores than in some of the other questions that we've asked. And since we presented this survey result to you guys in the summer, we've ramped up the communications and have put a particular emphasis on visibility of senior leaders. So, for example, Rob issues a weekly email message to all staff, which is cascaded through StaffNet Plus, and that still continues to attract a significant number of people interacting with it. So we see regularly 12 or 1,300 staff opening and interacting with that email. That is probably 4 times the kind of interaction that we would normally see in that kind of communication. So it's still proving to be a really strong mechanism for getting those things out. But senior leadership is an area that we're conscious of making further strides on. That feeds into this slide here around communications. And it's been really important over the past few years. Rob has championed this idea that communications needs to be a two-way process between our colleagues and managers and back again. And it's pleasing to see that 65% of people feel that they've had the opportunity for two-way communication. That's not high enough for us. So last week, as an example, Rob ran a question and answer session where we saw over twice the number of people sign up to attend that than did the previous session. And that's proved a really useful mechanism, but also one that people have interacted with, because lots and lots of our colleagues have then watched the broadcast of that on StaffNet subsequently. It's good to know that a vast majority of people know where to find the information that we're making available. There's lots of guidance and updates being provided to our colleagues, so it's good that we're hitting those, and again that people find that reassuring and that they feel that they're kept well informed regarding our response. And that's been something that we've taken very, very seriously, especially because so many people are working in such different ways. And then we ask questions around line management, and this is particularly pleasing, but I think also demonstrates the significant work that our line manager colleagues have done to maintain contact with a huge number of people who are now incredibly disparate. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen the fact that you've got really decent scores in terms of people saying that they find people accessible, that there's a significant degree of trust to get on with the role, and that they feel cared about. We had some questions earlier around mental health, and Councillor Cox was talking about people going into the autumn and winter now, and days drawing in, and that will inevitably impact on working conditions and the way that working from home feels. We've got a good base to build from here in terms of how our colleagues were feeling in the summer. But clearly, working conditions is something that we take very seriously. And in the last couple of months, we had a real push on people being able to do desk assessments from home, and also the provision of furniture and other equipment for people to make sure that they're working safely and comfortably from wherever they are, in addition to all the preparatory work that Rob was describing in terms of making our buildings COVID safe if people feel the need to come into the office to do their work. So that's the results of the survey. So I don't know, Chair, if anybody has any questions on those, if you'd like us to pause at that point.
I'm going to ask any member got any questions on that survey results? Yes, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. It's and thank you for the stats and data that was provided there, Tom. Obviously, it's fantastic that the vast majority of staff haven't been, or have at least reported, those who filled out the survey, good, or at least haven't been seen their mental health affected. But 11% marking that as either poor or very poor, that's still a big chunk of our workforce, and it's vital that proper provision is made in place. I'd just be interested, because it would be good to compare the impacts that these new arrangements have had. Do you have any data on that from lockdown or from past periods, just to see whether that's either gone up, gone down, or stayed the same?
Okay, do you have anything, Tom, at all to answer Councillor Carroll's point?
That's something that if, with your permission, Chair, I'll take away to discuss with my colleagues in HR. I'm not sure what kind of surveys that we've done that would have measured people's mental health in that kind of way and on this kind of scale previously. But certainly I'll look if I can try and find whether we have done that, and if not, whether there's any sort of comparator data, perhaps from the local government sector in Wales, that we could perhaps provide as an indication.
I think if you do find anything there, I'll let George Carroll come in a moment. Could you let all us know, not just Councillor Carroll? Councillor Carroll, do you want to respond now?
Yeah, I appreciate it might be difficult to compare because the questions may have been worded slightly differently, but I do recall previous well-being surveys that have been carried out. So maybe that could be something to look at as a starting point. There isn't direct data to compare.
Can't see any chat. Sorry. Okay, we've got some interference here. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Carroll. This Councillor Neil Thomas wants to say something. Councillor Rob Thomas wants to come in. Sorry, Rob Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilson. I just wanted to say that we've obviously done surveys in the past. We've done quite in-depth staff surveys over the last few years, pre-COVID, if I can call it that. But those surveys wouldn't have focused on the health and well-being of staff in the same way as this survey did. The reason we've asked these particular questions at this particular time is because of the obvious, and Councillor Carroll has picked up on it, to be fair, is because of the obvious issues with people working from home, working in a very different setting, not having that face-to-face contact with managers that they would normally have had, and having to go immediately to this new virtual way of working. And I always use this line, but no two people are the same. And, you know, people might, if you see the results of the survey, people might be very happy to work from home for a period of 3 or 4 months. But if you were to do that for the rest of your career, it would probably bring with it some quite significant challenges, not just for the individuals involved, but for the organisation as well. And so the reason for asking that question at this particular time is based on the fact that we've gone through a significant change as an organisation, and the time to judge the positivity or otherwise of that answer is basically when we do another survey, so we can compare like with like, and also when we get feedback from individual managers in terms of any issues that are raised throughout the organisation because individuals are having issues themselves.
I think Councillor Johnson wants to come in on this. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to make a methodological point, but also a more practical point as well. One of the issues with comparing surveys, and I've made this point to Tom Bowering in meetings like this, probably every year, is that it's not actually the same people who are completing this form at every time. Even if it's the same question, even if it's the same numbers, it's not the same people. So actually, these give you a snapshot and they give you an impression of what people are going through within our departments, and it's not always the same numbers of people from each department or the same people within them. So you can't always read too much into them. I think what's important, and I know I've had this conversation with Tracy Dickinson, around the staff forums and things like that, is making sure that people feel that they have the information that's available to them, whether that's through our employee assistance programs, that they feel comfortable with being able to turn to somebody, and they feel that the organisation has their back. So I think it's more, this is more useful to show that there is a section of people, and it's a fairly consistent section across 4 departments there, who are in a position of telling us that they have poor or very poor mental health. So we can see that's an organisational wide cohort, but I think what's important is getting that more individual qualitative feedback from managers to say that their staff who are reporting problems, whilst making sure that the information's out there so that staff can actually go and look for support themselves without feeling the need to report it to somebody, because that may be a barrier in itself. So it's about making sure that a flow of information to staff is there so that they know where to turn for confidential support, whilst also feeling that they don't have anything to lose and can feel comfortable in talking to their line managers or somebody within their management structure, that they can get the help there. There's a lot of help that's out there at the moment from all sorts of organisations, and I'm sure that Tracy knows in HR, sort of have those details and making sure they can. I think what we should need to be, what I want to feel comfortable with as a member of this committee, is that information is easily available to people on StaffNet, that especially people who maybe are less tech savvy can get that information, and it is cascaded down throughout the organisation so that nobody feels left out. Just to come back to the methodological point about who's actually completed this survey alone, we know 70% of people who completed this survey are people who work from home, but only 48% of people in the staff were the ones who were working from home. So actually there's a cohort of people who are not included within this in quite the same weighting. And those are the ones I think we need to make sure, because I assume they're more oriented towards visible services, etc. We need to make sure that those are also getting the same levels of support and help. Thank you.
Okay, I think Rob Thomas wants to come in on his as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say those are very relevant points. We fully appreciate that they're a snapshot. They are valuable in the sense that we do the surveys, but we do appreciate that different people will answer the survey at different times. Councillor Johnson has just pointed to a number of reasons why we're doing the management development sessions that we're doing in October. It's exactly for these kinds of reasons that, you know, managing in a virtual world and having a work stream in that workshop which deals with mental health and well-being. That's why it's so important, and that's why it's on the agenda. That's all I wanted to say, really. So we recognise all of that.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to move on the presentation, I believe, to transition.
Okay, I'll do this next bit then, and
okay,
then Tom, you'll come back and do the bit after that. So in summary then, as you can see from the slide, that this is the second phase. If you cast your mind back to that drawing which had the response, transition and recovery. So we've been in this transition phase for some time. The logic behind that is thinking about what lies ahead, but at the same time not losing sight of the fact that we were still over the summer very much in response phase, particularly in terms of elements of our work. And increasingly, we're going to be looking at the response phase again when things. So if we move to the next one, please. Thank you. Yeah. These are basically our transition objectives. I think you've seen these before as well back in July. So this is almost like a bit of a refresher. But the key objectives that we have indicated for the transition phase is that we must continue to manage and mitigate the risks proposed by COVID-19. That's becoming more and more apparent on a daily basis as we go through September. We need to continue with the response objectives. We can't lose sight of that. We did a lot of good work over the summer in terms of engaging our staff, in terms of getting sufficient PPE, in terms of putting procedures in place for various settings in terms of our work and in terms of our staff. So we can't afford to lose any of that, because if we were to lose it, it would mean going back to March again and reinventing the wheel when we don't need to. Lots of work around what we did in the crisis was very good in terms of our response. We need to think long and hard about what do we need to keep doing. We need to think long and hard about what did we do in response to the crisis, which is no longer relevant and we can stand down. And a lot of our work over the summer was around preparing and planning for service delivery in tune with the easing of lockdown that was happening across the country. So thinking about the health and safety of residents and businesses and visitors. So how could we plan in effect the reopening of all our parks, of our high streets, making sure that all of our sort of stakeholders who use our parks, our high streets, our resorts are kept as safe as possible. And a lot of that involved engaging with people, but also putting in measures to ensure that was feasible. We've talked about the supporting of our staff, and a key issue that's going to be incredibly important in the weeks ahead is again communication and engagement with people, with residents, with our communities in terms of trying to keep people safe and enforcing the message that coronavirus is still very much out there in our communities and we're still very much in this transition phase. So if we can move to the next slide. So what we've been doing as a strategic leadership team, we've been looking at how we manage that transition period throughout the summer. We've been looking at how the changes that we've introduced in the crisis has offered opportunities for a different way of working. We've got recovery that is being progressed at a directorate level, as shown on this slide. We've also got some recovery themes that we've highlighted, and we've got some teams in place that is taking this work forward, as shown on the slide on the right-hand side of the slide. As you could imagine, you know, there's some big ticket items in there around ICT, around schools, around issues such as business support, really important, the reopening of public spaces. So all those transition areas have been worked on over the last probably 6 to 8, well, no longer than that, probably going back to about June. And that corresponds with when the UK government and the Welsh government was easing the country out of lockdown. So that really is a quick run through the transition work that we've done. And again, that's probably an opportune time to stop and take any commentary or any questions, Chair.
Questions? Any questions? Yeah, Councillor John.
Just one question, not so much a question, Chairman, but an observation. With the current situation growing again, and it could go back to square one, Rob, do you think this is a possibility, the way we're going at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor John. That's a really, really good question, and a really relevant question, because what we've seen in recent days, even not, I was going to say weeks, but we've seen it over the last few days certainly, is we've seen Caerphilly go into local restrictions. We've seen Merthyr, RCT, well, RCT first, and then we've seen Merthyr, Bridgend, Blaenau Gwent and Newport go into local restrictions at the same time as well. We had the Welsh Government First Minister announcement yesterday around certain issues and around reinforcing the messaging in the main, but also in terms of looking at licensing rules and asking or indicating that alcohol couldn't be sold after 10 p.m. in the evening, whether it be in a pub, a restaurant, a club, or even in a shop. So the trend, the data is showing us that coronavirus levels are increasing across Wales. It's obviously increased to a certain level in those counties that I've already mentioned to require local restrictions. You'll all be aware of the figures, and there are certain parts of Wales where the increase is faster than other parts of Wales. Cardiff is an area which is growing quickly. The Vale isn't far behind, and there are areas of northeast Wales as well where the virus, the data is telling us that is increasing. The leader of the council made a statement on Monday evening about the need to be vigilant and the need to be really careful in terms of the fact that coronavirus is still here and that the data is showing an upward trend. Just to inform members, there is what's called an incident management team approach across Cardiff and Vale Health Board. That met for the first time on Tuesday. The reason it met was because the figures are increasing. It meets again in the morning, and that includes officials from Cardiff Council, Vale Council, and Cardiff and Vale Health Board and the police. There's then recommendations that come out of that after that incident management team, and those recommendations are put to Welsh Government in the event of a need for local restrictions. Now, what we did on Tuesday, which was well within our gift, we've stopped indoor visits to care homes in the Vale. So that is something which we've tightened up on again, having sort of, I wouldn't say relaxed is the wrong word, but having allowed indoor visits. We're reimposing the messages around social distancing, around working from home, unless it's absolutely essential that you can't work from home and that you have to go to your workplace. Avoiding unnecessary travel, the issue of encouraging people to not come together to socialise. Councillor John, you'll have seen the scenes on Llantwit Beach because you sent me a photograph earlier. So those kind of practices really have to stop if we're going to get control of this. Ultimately, what is really worrying is that the figures locally are increasing, and the incident management team meeting tomorrow will be very interesting, I think, in terms of the consideration as to where we go next in Cardiff and the Vale.
Okay, I know Councillor John wants to speak. I want to speak on this matter as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on this matter. Councillor John.
Just one quick one there, Rob. The way I feel about this, the only way we're really going to get a grips with this is to be really forceful. Whilst they've got pubs open till 10 now, I mean, when we had the lockdown originally, they were shut. And I'm afraid if you've got pubs open at all late in the evening, people will go there, they will drink, and they will join up together. It's a case of social distancing. Doesn't appear in many pubs. We've got situations in the Western Vale where this has happened. And I think Mark Draper's got to be stronger here. Otherwise, it'll go out of control. You know, we didn't have drinks on Llantwit Beach the last time. Admitted it was March time of year. And maybe now we're going into the wetter weather that'll stop. But nevertheless, I think that we've got to be strong quickly, because if we're not strong quickly, we lose touch, and then we're in big trouble.
Okay, I'm going to come in on there as well before Bob Thomas is. Just a couple of points there. I think you're absolutely right, Councillor John. We've got to be much stronger here, and I think certainly there are places in Penarth, the Esplanade and Windsor Road, where certain establishments, people congregate outside for a cigarette, or they take away alcohol and drink it nearby. Now, I know we put in some regulations about that drinking outside in terms of it, but we need enforcement is the issue. And we need to make sure that that enforcement is consistent. And because we did have cases in the Vale whereby the police saw something and didn't act upon it because maybe it was too many people, they felt it wasn't big enough or whatever. We need to get the police very much on our side here, but we also, I think it's right what the leader was saying, that we are technically ambassadors as well of the Vale Glamorgan as councillors. So we need to be proactive as well, and we need to report things, but we also need to know where to report it on a regular basis. So what sort of communication have you had, Rob, with the police over this? Bearing in mind, you know, we've now got an incident management team going ahead. What sort of things you think will come out of tomorrow's meeting?
The assurance I can give you, Councillor John, and also Chair, is the fact that when having sat through the incident management team and had the feedback from that on Tuesday, and also going into one tomorrow morning, is that it is incredibly rich in terms of the data that's provided. So the data is up to the minute. It gives us trends, it gives us information in terms of settings and clusters across Cardiff and the Vale. It's the professionals on that call are very good at analysing that data. Our own Dave Holland is on that forum as well. And obviously you're aware that SRS are central to the TTP process that's going on across Cardiff and the Vale. The First Minister's announcement yesterday, returning to Councillor John's point about pubs and licensed premises, I think that's exactly the reason he made that announcement, Councillor John, is that he's brought the closing time, if you like, forward, because there is evidence across Wales that, and I think the same applies in England, that social distancing becomes something a little bit secondary as the later you get into the evening. In terms of tomorrow, in terms of what will come out of it, I can't really give you an answer to that yet, Councillor Wilson, partly because what it does do is it follows the data and follows the science. So any decision that's taken in the morning will be based on up-to-the-minute information, up-to-the-minute data and analysis, and will be very much data-driven, which I think is really positive, because that just demonstrates that you are basically taking decisions based on the facts that exist at the right time. The other thing I should mention is what the IMT does as well, is it looks at trends. So if there is a particular trend in the data and that can be extrapolated forward, if that's the right term, that then, you know, we will have oversight of that when we make decisions tomorrow morning as to the circumstances that are particular to Cardiff and the Vale, whether that be Cardiff and the Vale collectively or Cardiff and the Vale as two individual entities.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Carroll wants to come in, and then the leader wants to come in after that.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to premises that aren't operating safely, then absolutely yes, action needs to be taken on them. The only thing I would urge caution against is it's been a torrid few months for the hospitality industry and pubs in general. And I've been to several pubs across the Vale. I cite the Star in Dinas Powys, the Three Horseshoes in Dinas Powys, the Captain's Wife in Sully, the Royal British Legion Club in my own ward of Landock. I declare an interest there because I'm a member of that club. And all of them were taking people's details when they were every customer's details. Table service was in operation, sanitizer. Some of them were ordering on the app so that to limit contact. And I think that we've got to be very careful that we don't tar the entire industry with a brush, because they have had it rotten. And those that are complying and doing things properly, I think it's important that we don't lump those in with establishments that perhaps aren't taking this as seriously as they should be.
Okay, thank you. I want the leader to come in now.
Thank you. Couple of things really. Yesterday afternoon, all the leaders of the South East Wales met with Mark Drakewood, the First Minister, and it also included the police. It was a very frank discussion about where we are and what's going on. And I think basically it was a case of just confirming that everybody is working together, and they are, along with health. In fact, health were there too last night, actually, I've forgotten that. So basically what's happened is that they're keeping in close touch with each other. Rob's talked about the incident management team and the fact that there's another meeting tomorrow, which will be interesting, as he says. But I just want to confirm that everybody is actually working very, very closely together. After that meeting, we then had a meeting of Alan Michael, the Deputy Chief Constable, and the leaders about this very point about cooperating together, about enforcing things. Now, clearly, we have the team led by Dave Holland, and I know that they've been going around looking at things like supermarkets, and they've given advice to some supermarkets, because I noticed today I happened to be able to get out for an hour. I went to a supermarket and I noticed that it's gone back to where it was previously, so it had kind of relaxed it. So whether or not they've been given advice or not, I don't know. But the point is that they are going out, they're issuing compliance notices if necessary, or suggested notices. And then if they're not complying, they're issuing a formal compliance notice. Now, I know that an institution in the Vale has possibly had one today, but that's going to be something like a gym or something, not a supermarket. So work is still going out. The point that we made out as well to Ali and Michael and the Deputy Chief Constable last night was very stark, very severe in some respects. Was what we want them to do is, if there are any breaches, they have to take it seriously, and they have to actually act properly and take criminal action if that's what it is. Because make no bones about it, unless people stick to the rules, then we are going to go into lockdown. I was on Broad this morning, and some people thought we were scaremongering. We are certainly not scaremongering. If we can see, we've seen what's going on around us, but people are still being unreasonable. I've heard two things, and most of them not in this area, thankfully. One was somebody had a wedding and they had 30 people in the wedding. They then went to go to have their evening shindig, whatever. Couldn't go in the rugby club, so held it in the street. And then and so the police had to be called. Another one was somebody who had COVID-19, had a test and went down the pub. So the point is, we have to be strict. We have to, if people are flouting the rules, then they've got to be taken to court, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of the 10 o'clock rule, I've talked to Mark about it. I listened to what he said again today, and basically what he's talking about is having the 10 o'clock stop selling alcohol after 10 o'clock. But one of the things that he's done differently in Wales to England is that he has given what we used to call in the old days drinking up time. And the reason he's done it is quite sensible in some respects, particularly for restaurants. So that if you have a cover at 9 o'clock, you can have your alcohol served up until 10, and you can carry on eating your meal and finishing your drink, but you have to be out by a reasonable time, and that's a similar thing in the pubs. Because a lot of those of you who are old enough will know that there was to be drinking up time of 20 minutes. So it was taking out time was 20 minutes after they stopped selling beer. And I don't think that's unreasonable, to be honest. And the reason, and obviously the reason he gave was the longer you drink, the less inhibited you become. So all I wanted to say was, we are being serious. We have talked to our counterparts. We have said to the police, look, what we want you to do is to be harsh. It might sound draconian, but we want you to be harsh at least once or twice on people, so you know that one, we're serious, and two, we will take action. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Councillor Burnett wants to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention one of the successes in terms of managing the hospitality industry is the awarding of free street cafe licenses that's been happening in our communities. It's been a really efficient and effective process where some of the licenses have been turned around in as little as 4 hours. But what I would ask, we're all out and about in our town centres, etc. Some of the cafes have embraced the sort of requirements of their licence better than others. If they have tables and chairs outside their premises, there should still be 2 meters between those tables and chairs. So sometimes you'll see that happening. There are some absolutely brilliant examples of that. On other occasions, you'll see the chairs back to back. It is worth, if you're not comfortable having a little word with the cafe, getting in touch with Nathan Thomas, who is managing that in Miles' team, and he will have a little word with the cafes. The last thing we want to do is to take the license off people or serve any enforcement action. But at the end of the day, we're here to keep people safe as a balance alongside keeping those businesses ticking over. And if those businesses need a little bit of help to understand why they can't shoehorn twice as many tables and chairs into their agreed space as they should, then we will help them to understand.
Okay, I think you made a really good point there, Liz, and I just wanted perhaps maybe we can put that on some sort of chat or communication about Nathan Thomas's number in particular, or his email address, so that people can communicate that to them, because obviously we see it ourselves. I'm not going to mention any premises, but we see it ourselves, or certain premises seem to be adhering to social distancing, but others not so. And I do think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we as ambassadors point this out. And if we can't point this out to the actual place, if it's perhaps too busy or whatever, then perhaps we should then send an email to Nathan pointing these points out. Okay, so I do think that.
Yeah,
yes,
if I could just clarify, because obviously some areas of business are regulated by SRS,
yeah.
And the street licenses are Nathan. I think what it would be useful to do is if we actually circulate who's responsible for what, and then we know the right people to get in touch with.
No, I think that's really helpful, Liz. Thank you very much for that. Okay, can we now move on now to the recovery update? Who's going to take that? Is Rob going to take that, or is it?
I'm happy to, yeah. And perhaps if Tom wants to come in at any point.
Fine.
Okay, can we move to the next slide, please?
Thank you.
Okay, so some guiding principles first of all, and these are really important from my perspective. So what we're really keen on here, and you'll see more of this at the next scrutiny committee, because the recovery strategy will come to you at that time. It's really important to stress this isn't a recovery to a previous state for all services. So why am I saying that? Because actually some of the things we've been doing during the last few months are actually better. Some of the ways that we're working is an improvement, but also because, as the last 10 minutes has demonstrated, we can't return to a previous state yet anyway, because of the uncertainty in the world at the moment because of COVID-19. It'll take a significant amount of time to recover. I'm talking here now about strategic recovery, so things around learning environments, things around the economy, the way we deal with issues across the Vale in terms of the community impacts of coronavirus. So it'll take a significant amount of time, and it'll be influenced by a number of issues. And again, cast your mind back to that first sort of slide on the PowerPoint. It'll involve us going back to response at probably more than one juncture along the way. But what's really positive is that it gives us an opportunity to really think about how we want the council to operate in the future and how we want to transform. So the underlying message is a lot of uncertainty, but also considerable opportunity. So if we move to the next slide, what we've done as an organisation is looked around what are those high-level themes that have emerged during the COVID pandemic, and what are those themes and how they link to our recovery. So key element of recovery is around health and social care provision. We've got a community and humanitarian theme around things like community cohesion, around housing, around homelessness. Issues around learning continuity is a big one. We've all seen what the impact of COVID-19 has had on children in an education setting. So actually in trying our level best to ensure that there is a continuity of learning moving forward is a really big issue. How we deal with our public realm and public spaces going forward, that kind of approach will be very, very different to what it was before March of this year. Business and the economy is a massive issue in terms of the impact that coronavirus has had and will continue to have on the economy. And then there's the environmental theme at the end there, not last because it's least important, but because it's slightly different, because what we saw during the summer, less people traveling, less flights, less environmental damage as a result of there being less activity in the country. So it's really about how we can map our climate change agenda and link some of the learning from coronavirus into that climate change agenda. So if we move to the next slide. What we have here is a way of trying to frame this work going forward. So we're all aware that we've got a new corporate plan, which was written for the next 5 years. And the objectives of the corporate plan are there on that slide at the top. So we're looking to see how those recovery themes impact on and have an effect on our corporate plan objectives. So those 4 objectives are going to be important to us as we move forward. But what's also important is how those recovery themes fit into those objectives, if that makes sense. So if we go to the next slide. So as I've said, we've reported the recovery strategy to Cabinet. That happened on Monday. You will see that recovery strategy at the next Scrutiny Committee. What we want to do in that strategy and what it will show for each corporate plan wellbeing objective, it'll have an indication of what we want to achieve. What are the relevant recovery themes that fit into that objective? Really important. What are the threats in us being able to deliver that objective moving forward? And what are the opportunities? And then we are going to develop a series, well, we have developed a series of strategic actions across that objective. And that will form the basis of our recovery strategy. And what will be important is how we take that forward and how we agree on those objectives and those actions that we want to take forward. They are going to be cross-cutting by their very nature. So as I said, Cabinet agreed that on Monday, and that recovery strategy is going to go to every Scrutiny Committee in the next cycle of Scrutiny Committees. So if we go to the next slide, please. I'm using this slide just to give you a little bit of a wrap up really in terms of where we are. So where we as a leadership team meeting weekly as a gold command structure, we're also meeting separately for what I would call normal non-COVID business. I've already said that recovery strategy was reported to Cabinet on Monday. It'll go to all Scrutiny Committees in October. That recovery strategy includes a full economic assessment and a full community impact assessment for the Vale. At the same time, directorate level recovery teams and corporate recovery teams will start working on those local plans and start delivery against those. And then there will, if you recall, when we agreed the corporate plan, there was the annual delivery plan mechanism. And that annual delivery plan for this coming year will encapsulate those recovery actions. And that will be the same for future years as well. So that, I think, if you move to the next slide, concludes the presentation for this agenda item. But just bear in mind, you will get a lot more detail in October.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to make any final comments or questions at all? Okay, can I thank you all? Thank you for that fantastic presentation. It was really interesting and very illuminating. Can we now move on to the next item on the agenda now, which I think Tom is delivering, I understand, and that is the annual delivery plan monitoring report Q1 for 2020-21.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You've got in front of you the Q1 monitoring report against the annual delivery plan. You'll remember when we were discussing the development of this annual delivery plan that we met with group leaders and the chairs of scrutiny committees and vice chairs to talk about the best way of monitoring and reporting on the progress against this. And one of the things that came through very strongly in the development of the new corporate plan was the integrated nature of our wellbeing objectives. And we've had a series of conversations about how best to demonstrate that integration. And one of the things that we thought was, rather than writing separate outcome-focused reports, that we need to write one and present that same report to each of the scrutiny committees in order that you're able to then look at the performance against the overall delivery of the annual delivery plan from the perspective of your committee. So what you've got in the report today is exactly that. In Appendix A, you've got the report on Q1 for each of the 4 wellbeing objectives. You've also then got an annex to the report which shows you for each of the actions and the performance indicators, the progress that has been made during the quarter. And there's an indication there, Chair, as to which of those particular PIs or actions relate to the remit of your committee, so that you're still able to look at the specific detail. There's a slight caveat on this report that in terms of the public accountability measures, Welsh Government suspended the collection of those measures in March as a result of the pandemic. We have sought to continue to collect as much of the data as we can do, and we've done the same against each of the actions that are outlined in the service plans as well. So what the report sets out is that overall the performance status for the annual delivery plan at Q1 is amber. There has been good progress in a number of areas, but as would be expected at the height of the pandemic, a significant amount of activity has not taken place, or has not taken place to quite the same extent that we would have expected. And that's the reason then for highlighting in this report that a significant number have been attributed a red status. I've asked officers to ensure that it's clear to you whether that's because of coronavirus, so that you're able to scrutinise those that were directly impacted, and you'll see that 70% of those actions attributed a red performance status were directly impacted by our response to coronavirus. So the report is structured as along the lines of each of the wellbeing objectives. For each of them, you can see the achievements and challenges that have been delivered during the period, and a reflection then of the RAG status overall against each of them. So one thing to note is that in Q2, I'm proposing we'll bring a specific presentation highlighting further the actions and measures within the remit of the committee. That hasn't been possible this quarter because we've reprioritised some of the resource that supports the development of these things. But I hope it provides a useful overview, and obviously we'll be happy to take any questions on specific aspects.
Okay, open to any member? Okay, can I, so we have no members going to speak, I'm going to say something. Can I thank you very much for this? And what I really do like about this, especially earlier on, is the pictures or the iconography, which is really, really quite interesting and illuminating, you know, and it indicates, you know, what the paragraph is about. And I do like that. And I think that's a very imaginative way of presenting the information. Does anyone member want to mention anything on anything particular? Councillor Johnson does. Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for bringing the report. Obviously, it's very detailed, and naturally, at this point in the year, and particularly given the year that we've had, it doesn't make sense to really to go through too much detail, because there's obvious reasons why so much of this hasn't been able to be carried out during Q1. I suppose really I just want to clarify whether there's going to be a process of realignment, or whether you know, as we go forward, as in will some of those targets be reset to be more realistic given the year that we're likely to have, or to what extent many of these indicators are simply going to be written off for the year, or will be you know, sort of considered lost simply because they cannot be carried out. So I think we'd be interested to hear how you're planning on dealing with some of those issues as we go forward during the year, especially as we're now well, literally at the end of Q2. So the issues have continued into this quarter and are likely to continue into Q3 as well, in one form or another.
You want to come in on that, Tom?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. We have been giving consideration to it. From our perspective, we did set this as an annual delivery plan, and we're going to continue to monitor against it. As I mentioned earlier, we are making sure that in the reports we distinguish performance that has been impacted as a result of the pandemic versus other reasons, and I think that's an important distinction for us to draw for you as members in order to provide some context about the extent that the pandemic has had on our corporate performance. When Rob was describing the work around the development of the Directorate recovery plans a moment ago, that's the first step in starting to write the annual delivery plan for 2021 to 22. And I took a draft of that to the strategic leadership team last week for their consideration. The idea being, I think, that we work through the rest of this year. It is so uncertain as to the environment that we're finding ourselves operating in. Progress is being made in a significant number of areas, and we remain ambitious against the targets where it's appropriate to do so. So the anticipation is that we continue to monitor against the existing set of targets and indicators. We provide commentary to explain why we have or haven't met those for the remainder of the year. And as we now move into the service planning process, which is starting in earnest in October, there'll be a process where we look then at the appropriate levels of targets and actions for the coming years, with all of that knowledge about what we want to achieve, what is achievable, and also Rob mentioned the community impact and economic impact assessments that accompany the recovery strategy, and I'd really encourage as many members as possible to look at those, because they're providing important data that's telling us about where we need to be putting our efforts for the Vale communities, and all of that data together will form what we look to do for the next year. But for the time being, we'll maintain the current set of targets and indicators.
Okay, I think Councillor Johnson wants to respond.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Tom. I was just thinking about how this is presented to us. We've moved over the years to a reporting by exception, framework where what's usually a handful of reds are pointed out to us, and that becomes quite different when it's 20%. It's 47 different things. So I'm just thinking about. I'm looking at the very top of the report to Cabinet. We have some of those figures in there. It might be, that's the chair moving his mic. It might be helpful to have it's worth putting a table in the front report for us, which sets out which of those reds and says which of those are result of coronavirus or as a result of ordinary performance issues, just so that we can see what they are. Because as you read through it, it gives you a lot of numbers and percentages without actually giving you that exception, reporting by exception that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a point as well. There's also on page 1112, for example, and a bit of 1113, there's also lots of missing data as well. I'm just wondering, will we get that data at the next quarter?
Bear with me, Chair, as I go down to the right page so I can give you the right
It's
answer.
112 on Appendix 2 on the PIs and Wellbeing Objective 4. We've got ones on energy and carbon dioxide reductions, pool car fleet, increase in mileage. I know it says monitored annually, but it doesn't seem to be the figures from Q1 to Q2. So I don't know which quarter it's reported on.
I've just gone down to those particular indicators, and they are end of year actions they're end of year indicators. So the performance would be picked up at the end of the year. So you won't get those until we report end of year Q4, which you'll get in September.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to come back to Councillor Johnson's point as well?
Yes, absolutely. The exception reporting suggestion in terms of a table splitting out coronavirus and standard sort of business as usual, whatever that now is, reason sounds a really useful suggestion, and I can certainly take that back. And I also think that it's something that we can reflect in the presentations that we look to give, so that we give you a committee-specific presentation to accompany each of these, and we could possibly go down a level so that we're explaining performance issues that are within your committee's remit, from both the coronavirus and the standard business as usual perspective. So no, I'll certainly take that away. Thank you.
No, I thought that was a really good suggestion, Councillor Johnson-May. Does anyone else want to make any comments before we wrap this up? No, fine. Okay, can I, including those comments of Councillor Johnson's, can we happy to support this report, and we take it as read, don't we? And we note it as well. Okay, we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is then the revenue monitoring. So I think it's Caris now.
It is me. Thank you, Chair.
Hello, Chair. Hello, Caris.
So this is the revenue monitoring report for the period the 1st of April to the end of July. And the report outlines for you the positions with regard to the revenue budget, taking into account the impact of the pandemic on the council's finances, and also it looks at the position in achieving the efficiencies that were agreed when we set the budget back in February. So we've already heard tonight the impact that the pandemic has had on the council, and it's obviously putting an additional pressure financially on the council as well. It's impacted on the council both as a result of incurring additional expenditure, but also for certain services we're losing income as well. The report does outline for you at the start the funding that's been provided by Welsh Government to cover some of these financial pressures. And that funding has been made available both to acknowledge the increased costs, but also the income that we have lost during this period. So there's a table for you at paragraph 2.2, which outlines the claims that have been made. The claims are made on a monthly basis in arrears. And the report details the claims that have been made for the period March to July, and also the payments that have been received in relation to those claims. I can just update that since this report was drafted, a further £600,000 has been claimed for August 2020, and that claim went in last week. As I said, we claim the money in arrears, but payment has been made as swiftly as possible from Welsh Government. If they have any queries on our claims, they pay the elements of the claims that they agree, and will then ask for additional information and then release that funding once they are happy with this. Are happy with what we've provided. So, I mean, important thing to remember is this has obviously assisted the council with its cash flow during this time. Within those claims, there are some areas of spend that have not been allowed, and Welsh Government has tried to be consistent with that across Wales. So, for instance, where they see a decision to fund something as having been a local discretion, they haven't funded it. From this council's point of view, that included the 10% uplift that we agreed for frontline staff early on in March or April. They've only funded 50% of the ICT costs, and they've just done that from June. Up until the end of June. From now on in, all ICT costs will be funding ourselves. With regards to lost income, we've claimed £1 million so far, of which over £900,000 we've had back. The report also details that as well as those grant streams, there has been other funding provided from Welsh Government for specific areas, and those are detailed at paragraph 2.6 of this report, and those total 36 million for this council. So that sums up for you some of the initial issues around the pandemic costs. Looking at this year's budget, it was always going to be a difficult year, but obviously the financial impact of COVID is making it more difficult. And as again reflected in some of the discussions we've already had tonight, as we come out of lockdown, there are still a lot of unknowns for services as we go forward, and that obviously has an impact on our ability to predict some of the financial pressures as well. The report does outline for you service by service the current projections, and as I said, these are likely to change as the year develops, and we get further information about what monies may or may not be available from Welsh Government for us. And the report also highlights where additional expenditure is the result of the pandemic, so that you can see that service by service. What you will see is that when we set the budget at the beginning of this year, we were anticipating a £1 million drawdown from reserves. Currently, we're actually predicting that we will need to draw down a further 3.2 million to cover the additional costs within the spend at the current time. We don't normally report at this time of the year on our council tax collection rates. We normally report to you on that when we're bringing the draft estimates later on in the year. However, as a result of the pandemic, we are seeing a reduction in our council tax collection rates. When this report was written at the end of, the reduction at the end of June was about 1.1%. This has actually increased now. At the end of August, the reduction had gone up to 1.2%. I have to stress, though, that to support households early on in this period, we did agree some changes to repayment periods so that people could pay their council tax over 12 months, or they started their payments in June rather than in April. This may well impact on the collection rate as we go through the year. So we are continuing to monitor that on a monthly basis. And we're also experiencing an increase in the number of residents requesting financial support via the Council Tax Reduction Relief Scheme, which provides support people who are struggling to pay their council tax. The increased cost of this for this year is currently estimated at £570,000, and that's based on the claims that have been made to date. So again, that may change if the situation for individuals changes as the year goes on. We have been given support for the first quarter of this by Welsh Government, and the position continues to be monitored nationally. We've yet to have confirmation if that support will continue. But so far, Welsh Government has provided funding for the first quarter. And just finally, Chair, then the revenue budget, when we set it, agreed efficiency savings of 247,000. At the current time, it's anticipated that these will be met, but obviously this is another area that we'll continue to monitor closely during the rest of this financial year. So that's a summary for you of the report that's in front of you, and committee is asked tonight to consider the position with regards to this year's revenue budget.
Any member. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I assumed that's what I was reading what you were trying to say then. But
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you, Caris, for the report. This isn't the sort of scenario we were anticipating when we set the budget coming into this year. Let's be honest about that. I think I'm happy to say that. This is what we have reserved. This is the reason for which we have reserves, and we're spending some of them. That's what they're there for.
Nice of you to say that, Councillor Johnson. All right.
Yes, it means we're not in any sort of trouble. That's great, isn't it? That's not a problem. I was just looking for a little bit of explanation, firstly, around the housing revenue account spend and anything that we were trying to claim, but Welsh Government were not, because I see obviously that's seen as a local decision because only half of the councils have their own housing stock. The other was just to try and tease out a little bit more about the council tax take. I mean, 1.1% drop actually doesn't seem too bad to me considering the circumstances. So I was looking to if we had an idea of how going forward, how long it would be before we have an idea of how many people have altered the structure of their payments or deferred until the last 2 months of the year rather than the first 2 months of the year. And the other point there was just about in terms of council tax support schemes, and I could probably do the refresh on how that works. If I remember correctly, Welsh Government put up an amount for the year, which is what, £9–10 million, and we hope that we come inside it. I'm just wondering if there's been discussion on that or changes on that, or whether with Welsh Government or with WLGA. So a couple of points in there, Caris, thanks.
Do you want to respond, Caris?
Yep, that's fine. Firstly, you're right, they're not recompensing us for any issues to do with the HRA. And the rationale for that is because 11 authorities in Wales have their own housing stock and the rest of the authorities don't. So there's no consistency there with regards to that. It is having an impact, though, which is reported in that report tonight with regards to, obviously, the HRA would normally commission work, if you like, via our building services DSO. So there is a knock-on consequence into the council from that point of view. And actually, I had some advice through from Welsh Government at the very end of last week, which we may be able to reclaim some of that, because it's lost income to the DSO, but it's not lost income to the council as a whole. So we are looking to see whether or not some of that large overspend that's detailed in that report, we could look to start to claim that from Welsh Government if possible. With regards to the council tax, we're obviously, as I said, we're monitoring it on a monthly basis now. 1.2% drop in collection rates equates to just over £1 million for us in lost council tax income coming in. We do know the number of repayment plans that we've agreed. I think the issue for us is, though, things are changing so widely out there for the residents. So as people come off furlough, for instance, they may well have been able to maintain their council tax payments. That may not be so certain as we go forward. If we go into lockdown and more jobs are lost, that is also going to impact on people's ability to pay their council tax, which is why it's quite difficult to predict this going forward at the moment. You're right, the council tax reduction scheme, we have a budget from Welsh Government every year to fund that. But what we're finding, I suppose for the reasons I've just outlined, is people are finding difficulty in paying their council tax this year. More people coming in for that assistance. Currently, as I said, it's about 570,000 more this year, based on the claims that we've had, than we've already got. But Welsh Government are monitoring this one on an all Wales basis, and so far have agreed funding for the first quarter for all of us. So we've had that money in, we've had a quarter of that back, and they continue to take data off us monthly with regards to what the position is on that. So it is being monitored on a national basis as well.
Thank you. And Councillor John, do you want to come back, Councillor Johnson, quickly?
Tell you what, Councillor John wants to go first. I'll come back later on the point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just emphasises the catastrophic situation we could be in if we get a full lockdown. Because when you look at the business grants that have gone out, and I have no idea how many received, but obviously a huge amount of business grants went out. If businesses were to close, they were not likely to get another grant. That's the problem, what the Welsh Government would face up to. And quite honestly, this could be a huge situation in the long run, because our council tax, as Caris has just told us, council taxes could be seriously affected. If we go into a lockdown, what's going to happen in the future? The furlough is going to be lowered now. What's going to happen with all those people out of work? So it's a catastrophic situation that could occur. And that's why it's so important that people got to take notice. Otherwise, if we go into a total lockdown, which we came from earlier this year, we're in big, big trouble.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I think I just wanted to reflect on something similar to Councillor John, which is the unprecedented nature of what we're going through. But I also it was just while Caris was talking, I was thinking about the actual impact of council tax take upon our wider budget, because I was just thinking about I'm going to try and remember off the top of my head audit figures, which I think is a turnover of between 370 and 400 million pounds, where our council tax take is around the 80 million pound mark, which means 1%, £1 million drop is It's actually 0.2% of our total turnover. So I was actually thinking that whilst that's the figure that maybe people have picked out of the reports, I was just wondering what that actually looks like in the wider range of council services, and whether we've seen actually more, cataclysmic's not the right phrase, or catastrophic's not the right phrase, but we've seen a wider drop in the other services that we would normally be relying upon as well. I'm just trying to put that in perspective, because we talk about the £240 million, which is our our net spending that we need to get back, but actually there's 160 million pounds that comes through the council coffers in one form or another, and that isn't really reflected necessarily within this document quite as well. So I just wonder if there's any comments on that, either now or when we move into the next round of these.
You want to come in on that, Caris?
I would say we can certainly provide a fuller picture on that next time round. So I can look at, yes, I could give you a lot more detail next time round if that would help really about the overall impact.
Okay, Councillor Thomas wants to come in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yep. Right, I've just unmuted myself. I just hope it works. First, can I just thank Caris for the work that's gone into this, and the continuing work for actually being able to keep us, well, to continue to balance the budget and keep things going forward. But I just like to say, I noticed Ian's comments about being able to having the reserves to be able to use in a time like this. I think it does vindicate the position which I took in setting two council budgets, and being able to build the reserves quietly while we had the opportunity to, and the same as Neil did in the last budget. If those reserves weren't there, we wouldn't be in a position now that we are in, that we're still able to function, and we still have something up our sleeve. As we said before tonight, we don't know how long this is going to go on for, and don't know how much more it is actually going to cost us. So as I say, thanks very much to Caris for all the work, and I'm not pleased that we're having to use the reserves, but I am pleased that they are there to be used when it's necessary to use them. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I also echo what Councillor Thomas is saying? Can I also thank not just Caris, but also the department as well that's responsible for all this, because clearly it's been a major effort, and it still will continue to be a major effort to produce these reports, and also to try and to make sure that everyone has aligned themselves with the finances of the council. And you know, it is important. I mean, I remember an ex-leader of the administration of a previous administration several times ago, when I was first on the council, said to me, you can only spend the reserves once. And it's quite right too. And I always reflect in what Councillor James told me then, because actually it was true. You can only spend it, and it's a lesson that I've learned. And you know, and I do feel, you know, we're in a much better place than some other councils are, fortunately. And I'm rather fortunate that we belong to the Vale Glamorgan than other councils, which may have much more trouble ahead. And I'm not going to go there, because some are not too far away. But can I thank you on that? And can we now move on to capital monitoring now, Caris?
Certainly, Chair. So what you've got in front of you now is the monitoring report for the capital programme for the period up to the 31st of July. And as I just said on the revenue one as well, really, it does take into account the impact that the pandemic is having on the ability of the council to deliver the programme. And it will be challenging this year to deliver the programme. As Rob outlined earlier on this evening, we took a decision early on in April that we wouldn't tender for capital schemes. We had concerns there about the availability of contractors actually able to tender, the reliability of their supply chains, and also we didn't want to enter into contractual agreements with people, which they then would have problems in meeting for no problems of their own, but just because of the COVID situation. We did review this, and services are now tendering for works where they think that there are contractors out there who can provide that work, and they will be able to complete the contract as agreed. So we have started to tender works, and this has enabled works to be successfully completed on our school buildings over the summer period. I know members will be aware that we always report that we have a lot of work undertaken on our schools during the 6-week holiday in summer, and we were able to deliver that programme this year, which was a relief, because that didn't look possible earlier on in the year. The report also outlines for you the current position with regards to the capital programme, and you can see the full programme now as the slippage of funding from 1920 is now included in Appendix 1 of your report. We've received a number of different grants from Welsh Government since we set the budget. Those are now reported, and also quite a significant amount of Section 106 monies has also been allocated to date, and those are all now reflected in the programme. As I said, the pandemic is having an impact on the programme, and you'll see particularly in relation to the housing service, works are having to be delayed and are likely to move into 21-22. For this programme in particular, that is very understandable, that people don't want works undertaken in their homes at this particular time, and so a decision has had to be made to delay some of that work. Should say as well, mind that the big 21st Century Schools programme has obviously continued throughout this period, and if you have driven into Barry, you'll obviously see the evidence of that as you drive into Barry. So that programme has they've been able to work with the contractors to ensure social distancing and safe working practices, and those contracts have continued to be delivered through this period. So Appendix 1 of your report details that programme scheme by scheme, and tonight the committee is asked to note the progress of the capital programme. I'm happy to take any queries.
Okay, open to members now. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Caris, for the talking us through the report there. I think I was actually quite interested to hear your comments about being able to deliver the school's improvements over the summer. I think I'm just sort of I was anticipating reports of slippage, which is sort of a regular occurrence with those projects. Do you actually think that the nature of the pandemic means actually there's a fair amount of pent up work that's able to take place because other things have been cancelled or postponed, and are we able to take greater advantage of that as time goes by? And on a specific basis, I was wondering if there's an update on the Barry Docks interchange project, which sort of gets mentioned almost will-o'-the-wisp style, but apparently has reached well-tagged stage 3. One other project seemed to stick around stage 2 for a very long time. I'm just wondering if there's any more information on that. Thanks.
With regard to the schools programme, actually, yes, we probably had more success in delivering what we'd anticipated over the summer this year than we have had in previous years. I think there may be an issue that actually the problems we've had in previous years is that there are a limited number of contractors who can do some of this work, and they haven't been able to take on the programme because they've had heavy commitments elsewhere as well, and the timescales have been very challenging for them. We didn't meet many of those problems this year when we went out to tender. Now, whether that's because their work has stopped elsewhere and therefore they've been able to take on the capacity that we needed. But certainly, I think our delivery this year, ironically, has probably been slightly better than it has been in previous years with regards to getting that work done before the schools went back in September. With regard to the docks interchange, can I suggest I get some more information to you and circulate it to the committee? Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Open to any other member? Yes, Councillor Drake. Councillor Drake, you're muted. Still can't hear you, Councillor Drake.
Oh, I've done it. I'm going to be slightly I'm going to be slightly pernickety now. On page 2 under recommendations, on the third bullet point, I thought, oh gosh, that's quite reasonable. A vial of £10. I think it does come to light then on page 6, you know, but I thought, I think that needs to be altered slightly. I think it's 10k.
Sorry, I think we did pick that up in when it went to cabinet action. We've obviously not followed it through into this report. Well, I'll get that updated. Yeah.
So it was just me being pernickety.
Right. Open to any other member? Okay, well, I got a question. Victoria Primary Boundary Wall on page 3. I just want to know where we are in terms of progress on that.
Again, can I come back to you with some details on that? The boundary wall at Victoria. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other member? Okay, are we happy to endorse the recommendations and changes? Fine, excellent, good, good, good. Okay, we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, which often we do. It's a housekeeping one. It's the fourth quarter strategic scrutiny, decision tracking and recommendation updated work program. Karen, do you want to say anything there?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. If we look at the report is in 4 parts. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. The report is in 4 parts. We look at the fourth quarter and second quarter appendices A and B. So if we go to those one first, basically, I can go through them all if you like, but I think we normally accept, with your approval, we accept the actions that have been agreed as completed. In relation to the ongoing actions, can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm coming through in my car. Yeah. In relation to the ongoing actions, if you look at the minute number 724, we are referring to a visit to the C1V contact centre. Obviously, due to the coronavirus, that's obviously not been arranged, so that's an ongoing factor. And then for the 24th of October 2019, minute number 419, that refers to the visit to the BSc. Again, obviously for the coronavirus pandemic, that hasn't been able to take place. It's up to the committee really whether we now consider that we keep them online or we delete them for the moment and look at them again, in months to come. Otherwise, I would just say that the actions, in my view, have been completed, and it's up to committee to decide whether they accept that.
Do you accept the view of democratic officer? Sorry. Okay, do you accept the view of the democratic officer that those actions are completed, even including the visits that obviously are going to take some while if we ever come to them due to COVID? What's your views of members here? Councillor John, are you happy to support that?
Be happy to support, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm not getting dissent here, so I assume we're happy to. Councillor Johnson, are you coming in there? Are you happy to support?
Yes, I'm going to dissent slightly and suggest that that maybe there's some way of putting those delayed, postponed visits into the forward work programme. Is that the most appropriate way of doing it?
Okay, we're happy with that. Maybe we can look at that.
I don't want them to drop off the end. That's all. I feel if you mark something as completed, it probably never comes back. Okay,
I think Councillor Carroll wants to come in as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is the appropriate place to raise this, so please correct me if not. It's just a question really, in the event of another national lockdown, now that we've got the facility in place for us to meet virtually, I accept that there have been issues, especially when we've had the full council meeting. Just wanted to seek Karen's views as to whether scrutiny will continue in the event of another national lockdown using this technology, or whether things will stop like they did back in March.
I think that's a question I don't think any of us can really answer to be quite honest, because obviously we're dictated by national government in terms of that, because there's still, you know, people circulating and whatever. So I don't really know that answer. And I understand your point, and I think it's, you know, it's a point maybe you can bring to Democratic Committee, Councillor Cowell, because I know you may not be, I'm not sure if you're on it, but nevertheless you've got members of your group on it, and I think that's something that we could raise there, given. But I don't really think it really belongs at this item on this agenda. But it's a useful point. Thank you. Do you want to go on, Karen, and look at the other appendices as well on the forward work programme?
Yes, Chair. In relation to Appendix C, this is the Scrutiny Committee work programme now going forward for September to April 2021. Again, this is a work programme we've put together in conjunction with the Cabinet Forward Work Programme and items towards the end of the Forward Work Programme that you as a committee have requested remain on the Forward Work Programme, and indeed we will add the ones that Councillor Johnson has referred to just now. So again, this is for the committee to agree, approve and make any additional recommendations or changes to it as they see fit.
Oh yeah, Councillor Johnson, do you want to come in? Sorry, Councillor Johnson, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen. It's a comment on the style, the new style of the forward work programme, which I'm sure it's aligned with the way that the Cabinet Forward Work Programme is done. But I find the fact that we've moved from a 2-page document setting out what's happening month by month to an 18-page document to be actually slightly bulky and less helpful for me identifying what's going on. I appreciate the extra detail that's in this new style. However, it might be helpful to actually have the old style document with a single page, 2-page, you know, sort of frontispiece, because that makes it easier to identify exactly what is happening when, rather than flicking through page after page to try and identify what's going on.
Okay. Are you happy to, members, are you happy to agree with Councillor Johnson's suggestion there? Yep. I'm not getting any dissent there. Councillor Thomas, you happy to agree? Yep. Fine. Fine. Got thumbs up. Yes, we are. Okay. Thank you.
Well, if we move on to Appendix D, this has been added in for members' information, really. You will have all received the emails advising you throughout the pandemic, the lockdown, of the emergency powers that have been agreed by the Managing Director and the emergency powers procedures, which was agreed in order for the decision-making process to be transparent and go forward, which meant that a number of chairmen, the cabinet member, relevant cabinet members, etc., were involved in making those decisions with the final approval by the Managing Director. So these have just been attached for your information so that we've got a record for the committee of what has been agreed and that has fallen in line with the committee's remit. And as you know, going forward now, the COVID EPs have been ceased and we are now dealing with the Managing Director's emergency powers process as has been agreed in the Constitution. Unless, obviously, going further on, if lockdown does resume and we end up going back to this process, that's a matter for the council and the Managing Director and the leader, etc., to make a decision on. So these won't be attached for every quarter. Obviously, this is just for today for your information as a committee and for transparency purposes.
Are we all happy with that? Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, lots of thumbs up there. I got no other items which are urgent. I got no part 2. Can I thank you all? And the important bit is stay safe, given this time at the moment, and obviously look after your friends and family. And as I said before, you know, observe social distancing. If you see it around not happening, please report it. Thank you and good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.